Continuing our coverage of the indictment of Governor Gavin Newsom's former chief of staff, Dana Williamson has pleaded not guilty to 23 charges against her. I'm joined now by two political consultants, Democratic Party consultant Stephen Maviglio and Republican consultant Tim Rosales. Thank you both for making time for us today.
Thank you.
So, Stephen, you have actually known Dana for a very long time, calling her a good friend. She pled not guilty to those charges, but two others are expected to take these plea deals. The rules allegedly broken here. Some critics have said that this is essentially sloppy political work, that they should have known better. Do you agree?
You know, I think to some degree, yes. And as you said, I've known Dana for 3 decades, and I also know Greg Campbell, who you mentioned earlier in the broadcast. These people that know the rules, you know, they've seen scandals in their times in Sacramento. We've had quite a few over the years. And so, yeah, they understand what's going on here. That's why it's unbelievable to me. That's why I think, as mentioned earlier, there might be political motivations here.
Tim, Dana was at the center of very powerful political alliances, essentially. For those on the outside, how are people processing this?
Well, for those on the outside, I think it's, you know, probably the biggest political news kind of from a legal standpoint since maybe Shrimp Scam, which if you look at our history books, you know, back to the 90s, including, you know, 12 elected officials who were, you know, convicted of corruption in terms of, you know, the political news. I think that everybody kind of, whether you're Republican or Democrat, are looking at this who operate and work in Sacramento and kind of asking a lot of the questions that I think that you just asked Steve, which is why, how did this happen? These are, you know, relatively very experienced people, but relatively, you know, kind of inexperienced, you know, things that they did. So what was the cause? And so those are the questions I think everybody has at this point.
Stephen, from the Democratic perspective, with Javier Becerra's name being mentioned in this case, his chief of staff apparently agreeing to plead guilty to taking funds from his campaign, how do you see this impacting Javier Becerra's own campaign as he's running for California governor right now?
Yeah, I think it's problematic for him. I mean, he's seen as an altar boy to a lot of people because he's always had that good government kind of image. And I think it's going to be a little bit of a stain on his image because it was his account and his employee, and it's hard to run away from that.
Tim, is this a problem for Javier Becerra, even from a Republican perspective, too?
Well, I think it's certainly a problem for him in an already crowded, you know, political and Democratic field. The question is how do you recover? What are his next steps? This is an opportunity to tell his story, and certainly he's going to have to at some point because he's so prominently featured in this. The question is just when is he going to do that, and being able to, you know, articulate that in a way that, you know, can help him potentially recover, or whether or not it's kind of a nail in the coffin for his gubernatorial hopes.
Could it be a nail in the coffin for his gubernatorial hopes?
Oh, I think certainly, especially with a crowded field like this, and he's already not performing at the top of that list. So therefore, you know, Democratic voters and voters in general aren't necessarily looking at him as one of the top tier candidates, and this clearly is something that you know, will damage that.
Stephen, I see you nodding a bit. Is this a campaign ender?
Well, you know, I think he's already had a couple nails in the coffin, given he's had a very slow start. It doesn't help, that's for sure.
How could this impact Governor Gavin Newsom and his administration and his potential future campaigns?
Yeah, and I think that's the bigger question. I mean, most of the headlines weren't Dana Williamson, they were Governor Newsom's top aide. And, you know, he's been on the rise for the last few weeks and months, and I think this definitely slow his momentum. I think their natural pushback, and we've seen it, and I think there might be some truth to it, is that this is the weaponization of the DOJ and FBI. This was a case that was started by the Biden administration. They must have had a reason to look into the Newsom administration, but then it was dormant. And then suddenly a new attorney for this Northern California was appointed by Trump, and suddenly it was revived, complete with a whole show at Dana's house, was people dressed up in shields, carrying guns, arresting and putting handcuffs on her son. You know, that was a show.
Did she say that to you,
Yes.
that happened?
Yes.
Tim, what do you make of that?
Well, I think, you know, certainly we've got some serious allegations, but in terms of kind of political motivation, I would see this, you know, as a bank shot, you know, at best, if you're talking about, you know, the Trump administration or the Department of Justice, you know, currently. If you want to go after Governor Newsom, there's certainly, I think, better and more direct ways to do that from a Trump administration perspective. And I think that, you know, what Steve mentioned about it starting with the Biden administration, you know, says a little bit about the fact that they feel like they have something there and they're seeing it through. The question, I think there's a lot of questions at this point that we just don't know.
And I mean, could you see Republicans, though, using this against Governor Gavin Newsom, circling back to the first question I asked?
I actually think we will see other Democrats in a presidential primary campaign using this against Governor Newsom. I don't think the Republicans are necessarily going to need to use this as ammunition against Governor Newsom.
You both mentioned previous scandals in California politics. Given what we know this week, do you see political consultants, lobbying firms, other operatives, this changing any of the way that things might operate in the state?
Yeah, I think there's certainly going to be fallout. I know, some clients of both of them have already said, we're not going to do business with you anymore because of this. I think other people are very nervous and looking at their Form 700s and other official forms to make sure every T is crossed and I is dotted. So that kind of thing will last for quite some time, I believe.
How about
Yeah,
you, Tom?
I agree. There are a lot of, California has some of the most stringent public disclosure rules in the country, and I think that, that is a protection, but it's also something that people who work in the political business, need to be aware of and just make sure that their I's are dotted and their T's are crossed.
How do you think voters are processing all of this as they try to make sense of it all?
The question is, how much really does this play into what voters are experiencing on a day-to-day basis? And I don't know that it really necessarily impacts what they may or may not do in June or November of 2026 at this point, and to what degree it is they're digesting the minutia that, of course, we are here, but to average everyday voters on the street, they still have bigger issues that are impacting them at their own homes and in their communities. I think that this is just kind of, they see this happening, and but it's not a huge top of issue point.
We have 15 seconds left, but just your final
Well,
thoughts.
somebody told me once, voters expect political corruption. It's like a dog drinking water out of a toilet bowl. It's going to happen sooner or later.
All right, Stephen Maviglio, Tim Rosales, we appreciate you both so much for your insight. Thank you.
Thank you.